On the line, we've got William Hartung. He's the director of Arms Security Project, the Center for International Policy. He's the author of Profits for War, Lockheed Martin, and the Making of the Military-Industrial Complex. And while we're focused a bunch on the Mueller testimony, I also want to make sure we're continuing to cover critical issues of substance that should be being discussed by presidential candidates. One of those is, how should we structure national defense? How do we structure national defense for national security, and also for morality, and also for international security, and also for sensible use of finances? To offer some of those thoughts is William Hartung. William, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All right, in 30 seconds or less, how should we structure the entirety of the American national defense system?
Well, I think for starters, we have to stop preparing for the kind of disastrous wars we've had in Iraq and Afghanistan, which would allow us to reduce forces. We have to stop the nuclear weapons buildup, which is supposed to cost $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years. We have to look at Russia and China in a more realistic light. Neither of them is a direct military threat to the United States, and we need to look for areas of cooperation as well as competition, which would also put some limits on the budget. And then there's all kinds of waste at the Pentagon. Excess contractors, overpaying for spare parts, cost overruns on weapons. We need to get tough with those corporations that are basically bilking the taxpayer. And we have a task force called the Sustainable Defense Task Force that said doing all of that would save a minimum of $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years, probably considerably more.
In the debate, I mean, really, it's post-World War II, Cold War era debate about the national defense budget, about the military budget. The contours have seemed somewhat predictable, right? The contours are, well, there's a lot of overspending at the Pentagon. It's getting us, we build this stuff and then we use it, and even in times we don't need to use it. We have built, what Eisenhower warned us of, this military-industrial complex, which will push a tendency to wage conflict, even when not only is it not necessary, but it can be counterproductive. Talk about the Sustainable Defense Project, or talk about an alternative view. The concern, one concern at least, is, oh, well, you're so worried about hurting other people, or so worried about overspending here. You're not that worried about overspending on welfare, you leftist. That it's really all just about being a bleeding heart liberal. If you were speaking to a security concern, if you were speaking about how we make sure that America's kept safe, how do you make that case?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First of all, people have to realize that we're spending immense amounts, one of the highest levels since World War II, higher than Vietnam, higher than Korea, higher than the Reagan buildup, almost twice the Cold War average, at a time when there's really no existential threat to the United States, if there ever was one. So there's a notion that somehow the Pentagon's been hobbled, the forces aren't ready because there's not enough money. That's nonsense. So I think that's the first point. And to spend at those levels puts pressure on the budget in many ways. It increases interest on the debt, makes it harder to invest in other national needs. It completely ignores some of the biggest threats we face, like climate change, epidemics of disease, which threaten far more people than things like terrorism, which is primarily, at this point, a domestic concern, not a global concern. So I think if you're concerned about sort of what are your priorities for protecting the country, fighting Iraq-style wars should not be a priority. In fact, it's a negative if we were to continue to do that kind of thing. Russia and China, we don't want an arms race with two nuclear armed powers. We don't want to be planning scenarios for how to go to war with them. We want to be figuring out areas of cooperation, be it arms control with Russia, be it working with China to deal with climate change, be it coming to some understanding of China's regional role and not assuming the United States can dominate Asia in the way it has, during the past. So, I think it really comes down to what's actually needed to defend the United States versus what is military overreach that's going to cause more damage than it could possibly prevent.
Let me ask about this through a political lens, maybe a democracy lens, but at least a political lens. I remember a piece of mail that I got. Exactly why they sent it to me, I'm not sure. It was from John McCain. And it was brilliantly done. because I had, for a long time, like many of us, remarked at what felt like a inconsistency, shall we say. A mean way of calling it would be hypocrisy. Pushing for ratcheting down federal spending, of decrying involvement of the government, in decrying taxation generally, decrying the building of the national debt, except when one remembers that since 1981, every Democratic president has reduced the national debt and every Republican president has increased it. But and I'd remarked and noticed, and that inconsistency, maybe that hypocrisy. And I got this letter from John McCain, and it was a whole packet of materials, and it said the liberals in Washington are spending so much money that it's taking it away from your defense and making you less safe. I was like, oh yeah, that's the turn of argument. That's the way it makes sense. And this has been, I mean, really the Reagan era Republican argument has been strong spending, big spending, large spending, maybe overspending on defense, and cut spending for everything, just about everything else. I now think about more contemporaneously, more modernly, look at what's happening with criminal defense, with criminal justice, and that there's starting to be bipartisan coalitions who are getting together. Heck, Koch brothers have participated in some of it, in reducing spending on prisons, where you get the folks on the right-hand side of the aisle who say, yeah, we want to save some state and national money on prisons, and you have folks on the left-hand side of the aisles, yeah, we want to have our criminal justice system be a little less racist and a little less oppressive and abusive. What is the political path towards the kind of bipartisan thing, or maybe it's another pathway than that, but the kind of bipartisan thing that we're starting to see on criminal justice that so far we haven't seen, because instead of what we've seen is that John McCain letter?
Well, there is a minority within the Republican and conservative camp that says we're spending too much on the Pentagon. Groups like National Taxpayers Union, groups like a Committee to Reduce Spending, even Grover Norquist's folks have said at a certain point, we can't even audit the Pentagon. Why are we giving it endless amounts of money? So there is a coalition called the Pentagon Budget Campaign, left, right, and center, that's been trying to push that argument. I think it's been weakened by the fact that Trump threw this big tax cut at the right. And I think some of the groups on the right that had been critical have been more muted because of that. But there are still sort of budget hawks who are willing to work with progressives to try to, put some sort of limits on the Pentagon budget. But things have been moving in the opposite direction the last 2 or 3 years. Huge increases, ways to evade the Budget Control Act, which was supposed to cap the Pentagon budget. So we're really reaching, historic levels of spending. We're going to have to roll it back. And I think, there's a lot of potential on the progressive side, because progressive candidates, for example, are saying, let's have Medicare for all, let's have a Green New Deal, things that involve domestic investment. You can't do that and also steeply cut taxes and give the Pentagon everything it wants and more. So
no, some of the money is in the banana stand. Some of the money is in the Pentagon. But let me ask this. We got about 20 seconds. Say just a little bit about the political power that props up the Pentagon budget. Well,
a lot of it is Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, spending millions on campaign contributions, hundreds of millions on lobbyists. You've got a head of former Raytheon lobbyist running the Pentagon. Under Trump, it's the military-industrial complex on steroids.